Hey friends, I'm Otis Gibbs, and this is my buddy Kenny Vaughan. He's going to share some stories about the Rolling Stones.
It was either late 65 or early 66 they played at the Auditorium Arena in Denver. Often credited wrong venue in different publications, including Bill Wyman's book. But it was the Auditorium Arena in Denver, and it was the Rolling fucking Stones. What can I say? You know, they were singing through it was an in and around kind of place where they would have boxing matches and stuff, or they would have, probably all kinds of stuff that they did there, over the years. And it was next door to the Auditorium Theater, which was where, they'd have Frank Sinatra or people like that with orchestras and stuff, that kind of stuff, and plays and all kinds of stuff at the Auditorium Theater. But anyway, the same building downtown. They sang through the announcers' speakers in the ceiling. There was no PA system in those days in 1966, 65. That just didn't happen, So there were two mics on stage, one for Mick Jagger and one for whoever else was going to walk up and sing harmony. And they made it about 25 minutes, and there was mayhem. The girls, these young girls the cops are trying to keep them off the stage, and the girls are, trying to get past the cops, and finally the cops just shut the show down, and they had to get the Stones through the crowd to get them, because it's in the round. There was no way to get off stage except for to walk through the crowd, and so they had to have form a, like a wedge to get them through, and it was pretty kind of exciting, to see the Rolling Stones.
Could you even hear Charlie?
Yeah.
Because it doesn't seem like Charlie would be the kind of drummer that would project.
Well, it's weird. Back in those days, I also saw the Love and Spoonful at the Denver Coliseum. They really pulled out all the stops. They had 2 electro voice banana column speakers on stands on each side of the stage instead of 1. That's what the promoter provided, and a couple of mics to sing through. Once again, there was no mics in the drums, except for the drummer was a singer, so he had a mic, and Zal had a mic, and John Sebastian had a mic. So there's 3 mics on stage, basically. But you could hear fine, It was the Love and Spoonful. They were great. So I don't know, people just did that back then, You think about Elvis Presley playing shows in 1957 or 58. There was no mic on his guitar.
On the back of a flatbed truck.
Yeah, or anywhere. There was never a mic on Elvis's guitar, but you can kind of hear it, and if you hear some of those live recordings, And Bill Black had a Shure mic stuck into, wrapped, it was just taped to the bass down there by the bridge, by the tailpiece, and sometimes he plugged that into a Fender amp if there was one available. I think I've seen pictures of him plugged into a Tweed Fender, but a lot of the times it was just before they had a DJ. It was just Bill on upright bass, Elvis on acoustic guitar, and Scotty with his little amp on a chair. And so he's really probably the only thing he really heard, that and the vocal. And the same thing with Johnny Cash recordings from the, late 50s, early 60s. All you hear is Luther and Johnny's voice. All you hear is and Johnny,
Yeah.
I really like the early stuff a lot, because those were some of the first time you heard those songs, like Howlin' Wolf tunes and Muddy Waters tunes and that kind of stuff. I mean, Jimmy Reed. We had Jimmy Reed records because they played him on the radio when I was really little. I like that era. But then I saw him on their first night of the 69 tour, and that would have been Mick Taylor's second gig. He played Hyde Park with him in London, and then they went to LA and rehearsed, and then they started their tour in Fort Collins, Colorado. That was the first night of that tour. So that would have been Mick's second gig with the Stones live. And man, B.B. King opened the show. And this is pre-Thrill Is Gone B.B. King, when he was still thin and playing his ass off. playing, he could play jazz, People don't know that, but he could. And he had a, 16-piece band. I think at that time they were doing roughly 350 dates a year, which is insane. And they're all dressed up, matching suits, they're all wearing suits and ties, and Baby comes out and just murdered it. I mean, it was like they were so punchy and tight, and he was singing his ass off and playing, it's fierce. He was on fire in those days. And the band was just, how could it be any tighter than that band? If you're playing 350 shows a year, you're going to be tight. And I'm thinking, how are these Rolling Stones going to follow this guy, Because he didn't leave anything, man. He wore that place out. And they come on stage, and this, back in those days, there was no real production. There was just a backdrop, a white backdrop maybe, and if there was even that, and, spotlights, just maybe 2. And that was it. But it's the Rolling Stones. And there was Stu had his grand piano set up behind Keith's amp, kind of pointing at Charlie. He would play on some songs. He had a tuxedo with tails, and he would sit down and play, And a lot of times he wouldn't play. He was the roadie, and he set everything up, They flew into Stapleton Airport in Denver. He flew in early with the gear, loaded it into a truck, took it up there, set it up, and then they flew in and rented some cars and drove up. And then when the show was over, they drove back to the airport and flew back to LA that night. It wasn't like it is now, And, but they walk out on stage, and Keith and Charlie started the first song off. And Bill's just standing there, holding his bass. And man, when he hit the bass, they were playing through those SVTs. They all had those big Ampeg amps, When he came in and the Rolling Stones sound, first Keith and Charlie, and then he comes in, and it was like, whoa. It was like, wow. This is it, man. And when they got to the Midnight Rambler, all bets were off. It was like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen in my life. That audience was going crazy. And Mick was just, whipped him into a frenzy on that one. That was kind of the centerpiece of the show, really. That was the one.
Those Ampegs, are they V4s?
Yeah.
Yeah. Those sound good, man.
Yeah, man, I had one, but I got rid of it because where am I going to use it,
I had one years ago. Mm-hmm. I used it a little bit. And
so good.
Loud as hell. But
yeah, good tone, though. Yeah. Man, they sounded great no matter what they played. I mean, it didn't matter what amps those guys used. They always sounded good. Yeah, have you heard the one about Brown Sugar? The Stanley Booth, is that his name? The Southern writer. He wrote that song. He wrote the book. Was it Dancing with the Devil? He was on that tour that I saw. He was at the rehearsals in L.A. and he went on the tour with them most of the time. Not all the dates, but he was on he traveled on the plane sometimes with them, hung out in the hotels and stuff. And he wrote a book about it about 10 years after that happened. And a really good book. It's called Dance with the Devil or something like that. Great. But he was at the recording session in Muscle Shoals where they cut the basic for Brown Sugar. And he said it was late at night and they're trying to get this song together. He said it sounded like shit. He said he said it sounded terrible. And he said they take after take and they were talking and messing around. And he said they finally did this one take and Charlie stood up and said, "There it is, that's the track." And he put his sticks on and left. And he was like, "That's it?" I was like, "Well, I guess I won't, that doesn't sound very good." And he said that he left the tour and the next time he saw him, I think it was New York City in the hotel room, and they've got a tape recorder there and they're dancing to Brown Sugar and it has the overdubs on it. They did the overdub somewhere else. And he said, "This is the greatest song I've ever heard." It's like, that was the take I heard, but it didn't sound like that when I heard it, And then when they got all the other information on there, he said, he said he couldn't believe it,
Jim Dickinson said that in his book, that in those sessions that
he was there, yeah.
That they were terrible, and then all of a sudden they'd be great.
Yeah. I mean, most of my favorite bands really aren't good musicians, in reality, in the real world, I mean, my favorite band is Fontaine's DC, and they're definitely not great musicians, but they're my favorite band. I'd give anything to see Fontaine's DC. They played Nashville, and I was out of town. Oh, God, yes. I'm a crazy fanatic. I love Neil Young. I was reading some interviews just last week. I think it was Uncut magazine, and they had some interviews with Billy Talbot and Ralph Molina, talking about Crazy Horse, experiences, and they were talking about making the, like Down by the River, stuff like that. Like, yeah, man, we fell into a groove and we just cut it. It was just boom, it was over. And those kind of things, and how. They, Neil would call them in. We're going to learn a bunch of new songs, and they learned, 12 new songs, and they, play them, and then they go to a recording session, and he'd bring in 12 newer songs, Oh, no, we're going to play those today, like, what are we going to? Oh, I got this one, and then he'd play another one, and they just, he's talked about how prolific he was and how impulsive he is, that he moves at a different pace than most people like him. He's he's one of those guys that just has a lot of ideas. Always. Yeah, anything I can find about him, I read. Really? All those Mojo magazine articles and Uncut magazine articles are always great because they'll just take one little thing and kind of go into it, and you'll find stuff in those articles that you won't find in Shaky. You can read Shaky, but a lot of those little side stories aren't in there. So it's cool to have that perspective. Tonight's the night. It's hard to beat.
That's my choice.
Oh yeah, but what's the one that has Barstool Blues? It's the end of side one. Barstool Blues.
Zuma. Is it the same era?
Yeah, that's my favorite Neil Young track.
Really?
Yeah. I don't know why, but it just that's the one that I really like the most.
There's something about Tonight's the Night.
Oh.
Like when you hear Tired Eyes.
What a record. It is perfect because he knows what he's doing. He's conveying the emotion,
There's just a feel to that,
yeah,
and an honesty to that record that seems like something to try to attain.
Well, we were talking about him last week. We were talking about we were telling what do they call the thing that tunes the voice now? Auto-tune. We were talking about that. My friend Bobby Field, the record producer, calls it the No Singer Left Behind box. But we were talking about how, well, there's an artist right there that would never do that. I mean, if you listen to some of those guitar solos, he plays with notes that are deliberately out of tune. He's deliberately out of tune because that's a thing. It creates a tension. And if you went and tuned those records, it would sound awful. It would suck. But he plays with tuning the way the Velvet Underground did on the first album, John Cale. Sterling Morrison and John Cale were deliberately detuning their guitars to get a more irritating sound, and it's a great record. I think it's the best Velvet record. It's the best. But they deliberately played out of tune on certain things, to create an effect, to create an emotion, and that's, John Coltrane, Miles Davis, Miles will come in under the note a little bit. You know, he will play because it's part of the expression. You know, you don't play everything perfect in that kind of music. Perfect entails that you play. There's emotion in notes that are slightly out of tune. You know, when Miles does it, it's brilliant. It's deliberate. You know it is. You know, you can see it when he's doing it. You know, I saw him live, and he's got that. He'll go up, you can see him thinking before he blows a note. You know, he's like, one note. It's like, wow, I wish I could play one note and make it sound like that. You know, it's like, whoa. You know, it chills up your spine. You know. Oh, I was playing with Lucinda Williams, and he was backstage at a show. I just saw him there, and I was like, whoa. I didn't mess with him though, because he was, he was listening at the time. And well, we had played. He had listened to us, so I can't remember who he was listening to, but I didn't have. There was no. I wasn't going to go up to him. Yeah. I wasn't going to be that person.
What do you think about his rig?
Oh, I think it's great. It's personalized. You know, I always like people that have a personalized sound that is, and he's worked on it for his whole life. You know, that Tweed Deluxe and that black guitar, that black Les Paul that's modified and changed pickups and changed parts, but it is what it is. I saw Crazy Horse one time, and it was they were playing on this, it was a big coliseum, and they were on this giant stage, and they got all this stuff. And the whole show, they were all standing, bumping into each other in front of the bass drum, These three hippies and a drummer, up there just like going, with their heads bent over and, kind of like having a little powwow there, And I was like, but man, it sounded like $1 million. It sounded like a jet airplane taking off, But, there was a show that didn't have any showmanship. There wasn't any posturing or, how's everybody doing? And none of that shit, I was working in the studio last week, and the singer was so fucking good. Me and the engineer were just like, wow, what the fuck? This is amazing, and there's never, no pitch correction was necessary, but it was just so cool to hear somebody that really can sing, and not have to figure out, well, how are we going to make this work, which, most people don't really, it's kind of shaky, but there was an incident, a really good country vocalist here in Nashville. She's one of the best singers I've ever heard. And she turned in a record to her label back about 15 years ago. And they came back and said, well, we want you to auto-tune this. And they were like, why? There's no out-of-tune notes. And they said, oh, it's not about the pitch. We want the sound of the box, because that's all the singers on country radio have that sound now. It's a sound. It has this buzz to it. It has a certain thing, the way it rearranges the harmonics and stuff. And it's kind of cool for some kinds of music, like, maybe a synth pop, that kind of stuff. It's really cool because it's like, wow, listen to that. It sounds groovy, man, But for country music, it just sounds dumb, And, but they wanted her to, have that sound. And they were like, oh, it's like, why? This record's fine, And I was like, oh, there you go. I will say that I did have an encounter with them once in the 70s. My friend and I went down to this horrible little joint. We risked our lives to go see Waylon. It was right before the Willie and Waylon phase, So he was still greasing his hair back. It was long, he had long hair, but he didn't have a beard yet. And he had the leather biker bands on his wrists, and the black leather vest. And he was kind of in transition, but he still had the product in his hair. It was long, but And, they were really good. And we went down there and we befriended Ralph Mooney, the steel guitar player, who was a character, kind of how do you describe his attitude? He didn't really give a shit, about anything. And, but we had fake ID. I had a fake ID. My friend was older than me. He was legal. I had a fake ID. And he dispatched us to the bar to get him vodka and, what was he drinking? Vodka and something. Some mixer. And little plastic cups, little bar, tiny little things. We got him many drinks before they were setting our stuff up. And, and the audience was really like a straight white couples kind of place, because it was kind of like a sit down kind of club,
Dinner theater sort of deal.
Not really, but it kind of had that vibe a little bit, a lot of couples. And I remember when Waylon came, we were like, where's Waylon? Is he coming out? And I remember Ralph saying, "Motherfucker's on the bus." And I'm like, okay, I guess he won't be out until the show, and they kind of started a little bit late. And when Waylon came out, all the girls went nuts. I mean, there was like this, you could feel this energy you could hear this kind of collective shriek and gasp through the audience. And some of those guys got kind of pissed off. I kind of got they weren't happy about their woman suddenly having a reaction to the great Waylon Jennings. And he really did have that sort of, I think that was the height of his sex appeal, like when he's still real lean, and no beard at that time. And he kind of just he had this, but he was great, he was just like, he had that folk element, like folk rock, West Texas, Buddy Holly, country. It was different, it wasn't Nashville country at all, and I always liked his music, I always thought it was different, I didn't see him as a typical country artist, he didn't behave like one, he didn't look like one, his song selection was all over the place, he'd sing pop songs, he'd sing folk songs, he would sing, all kinds of stuff, but it always sounded like Waylon, And Richie was the producer on a lot of those great records later on, in the early 70s to the mid 70s. He had a big thing with the Waylon beat, the boom, 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 pre-disco thing of hitting all four beats per measure on the bass drum, And Waylon started doing that whoop whoop, like, whoop whoop, but it was somehow whoop whoop whoop, it was like, what the hell, And they got the phase shifter droning on the low D string on the Telecaster, and that was the other thing, is like, this was before Waylon started hiring other guitar players to play solos. He was still, the next time I saw him was in the late 80s, and I was like, horrified, I was like, there was some guy over there playing a Kramer heavy metal guitar through a, like, it sounded like he should be playing in fucking Journey, I was like, what the fuck is that? What is this? Who is that idiot? And why is he playing like that? I was like, what is going on here? And it was like, it's over, It's like, oh, geez. But back in those days, Waylon was a great guitar player, man. He was so good. And you listen to those pre-Ralph Mooney records, and he's basically playing Ralph Mooney licks on the guitar. And he finally persuaded Ralph to join his band, which Ralph did sort of, to hear Ralph tell it was kind of reluctantly, but I think what happened is Waylon enlisted Jesse, Ralph loved Jesse. He enlisted her to persuade Ralph to join the band. And that's how that happened. But was working with him one time, and this was after Waylon died, and I was working with Ralph, and we were taking a break, and I said, Ralph, man, those records you guys made, they were just like unbelievable, just what a mood and what a sound you guys had. He said, well, his music and my music really weren't the same, but I guess we did all right. I was like, okay. And then you listen to Rainy Day Woman, and Ralph kicks that off. It's like every time I've had to pull the car over and turn it up and just sit there and listen to it. I've heard it a million times, but every time it still comes on the radio, I have to stop and listen. It's just like it's a thing of wonder. It's amazing. What a record. And Ralph is a big part of it. Waylon loved Ralph. I don't think Ralph loved Waylon. But, find a better record. God, I love Billy Joe. He was one of the nicest cats I've ever worked with or known. He was just like a wonderful person. I love Billy Joe. I worked with him on a couple of records. I worked on one with Eddie and Billy, both. I think Ray Kennedy was doing that one at Ray's studio when it was over on Music Row. And it was just great. It was like walk into the studio and, we knock out songs and go have something to eat, come back and do another session and knock some more out. And it was only a couple of days, but we did a whole record. I think it was called The Earth Rolls On, or maybe that was after Eddie died. I did one with Eddie and then one after Eddie died. I can't remember which one was what. But anyway, Eddie was great. Always a nice guy. I met Eddie when he was about 15. He was playing with Billy Joe. I was still living in Denver, and every morning I wake up and read the Denver Post, and look in the entertainment section, see what was going on. If any of my friends were playing in any bars, they had these extensive music listings back in those days, And I was looking, there was this Fern bar out on Aurora on the way to the airport in the middle of nowhere. And I was like, it says Billy Joe Shaver is playing at this place, it was in a strip mall. It's like a Fern bar in a strip mall back in the early 80s. It was like a 70s kind of vibe place, I'm like, this can't be Billy Joe Shaver, And, but it had to be, Billy Joe Shaver, So I called my friend up and said, man, we got to go out to this bar. And there's this guy that I'm a big fan of his music. He's, he wrote all the songs on Honky Tonk Heroes. And, he's really kind of an icon. And so we went out there, and there's this band setting up over in the corner, of the Fern bar. And there's about 20 people there. And there's about 5 or 6 people that are actually there to see Billy Joe Shaver, And so, I went up and talked to him, talked to Billy Joe, talked to him. This is my son. Eddie. Eddie's like 15. He didn't look anything like he looked when he grew up. He's a skinny 15-year-old. Playing a 335 Gibson, and they played and they were great. And there was maybe less than 10 people there to see them, and then there was about 20 other regulars at the bar sitting there, and occasionally they'd look over their shoulder like, what is it? And then just go back to watching the game on TV or whatever was going on, in this Fern bar. And with the plants hanging and planters everywhere. And it's like, whoa. And then me and my friend, we were the only like sort of punk rock hippie, leather jackets and, tennis shoe jeans guys, But Billy Joe was great, and he was friendly, and they were touring around, and that was just a pickup gig they scored. I was like, well, welcome to the music business. There it is, right there. The guy's an icon in my world, and he plays Denver, and there's less than 20 people that have come to see him. Well, he's a really sweet guy. He wore his heart on his sleeve, and he was really honest to a fault. He was never bullshit anybody probably in his entire life. unless it was something he had to do but if he might have consciously, I got to bullshit this guy, maybe something like that. But in reality, he was really honest and really down to earth, always friendly, always open and warm, and just a fantastic person. And what a great songwriter. I mean, and that was why he was such a good songwriter, is because he was so honest. He knew how to cut through the bullshit and write what really is going on, He knew how to cut right down to it. I don't know, I think all Billy's songs came from a thing that he actually experienced. Unlike a lot of writers I know that have to, well, what can I write about today? How about we do this, Billy Joe never did that. He never sat down to, I got to write a song. I think the songs had to be written, His songs were real, and they had to, they were there, and he just had to put them down, had to give birth to them or whatever, but they're real. And that's why they're so good, And he was real. And my friend Jimmy Lester played drums with him back in the 80s for quite a while. And Jimmy grew up in Nashville. He still lives here. And he, those guys were living in Texas, and Jimmy would meet him, sometimes. And he said one day, this is before cell phones, it's in the 80s, and he's sitting at home in Nashville, and the phone rings at like 10 in the morning or whatever. And he said, hey, we're down in Memphis. We're going to do this thing down here. Can you come down? And Jimmy's like, sure, when is it? He said, now? He said, okay. And so he said, I got to put my drums in the truck, and I got to, put some clothes on, put the drums in the truck, and I'll be down there. Here, let us give you the address here. And then so Billy gives him the address, and Jimmy gets in his truck with his drums and drives to Memphis. It's a 3-hour drive, 3 hours, plus a few minutes. And so he gets down there, and he pulls up to the address, and he looks, and there's Billy's car, his station wagon or whatever I think it was. And there sit Billy and Eddie in the car, and there's a phone booth right there. And Jimmy goes up to him, and they're sitting there with the windows down, and he said both of their faces were beet red, like as red as this shirt. So just like redder than anything you've ever seen in your life. And he was like, it's like in the afternoon, like 3 in the afternoon or something, and he's like, looks at the car, looks at them. You guys are really red. What's going on? He said, oh, Brenda gave us some suntan pills. And he looks at the phone, but he says, is that the phone that you called me from? They said, yeah. He said, you guys have been sitting here ever since you called me. They said, yeah. Follow us. So he got in his truck, and he followed him to some thing, where a recording studio or something, where I don't remember what they were doing, but.
What in the hell is a suntan pill?
I don't know. And Jimmy said it was redder than any tomato you've ever seen in your life. They were just bright red. He said it was, you couldn't help but mention it, because it was like, what have you done? I guess they OD'd, took too many, in shaver fashion. And the last time I saw him was, it was, I don't know when that was. Remember he had that incident in Waco, and he had this, Kenny, I got this song. Can you come over tomorrow afternoon, Saturday afternoon? We're going to cut this thing. Can you play on it? And I said, sure, man. He said, it's called Wacko from Waco. And I said, I'll come over and play on it, Billy. So I get there, and it was Richie Albright on drums, and B. Spears on bass, and I can't remember who else was there. That guy that used to play in Waylon's band and sing harmony with him, Ricky, somebody. He's a famous guy in Nashville, playing acoustic, and I think Mickey Raphael was there. He's on the record, but I think he was there that day. And Willie sings the second verse, but he wasn't there. We're gonna leave that verse open for Willie, Okay. But anyway, it was a great song. It was like Billy Joe's account of what happened in Waco when he shot that guy. And he said, I gotta set the record straight. I wrote the song. This is what really happened, and it's from his point of view why he had to end up shooting the guy, And I was like, God, really, only you would get yourself into this situation, But it was a good song, I had a great time recording. And so I was leaving after, I was loading my stuff out, through the lobby there at the House of Blues recording studio in Nashville. And Billy Joe says, are you leaving, man? I said, yeah, man, that's really been fun. He said, wait a minute, man, I got something I wrote a book. I got a book for you, man. It's out in my car. And I said, you wrote a book? And he said, yeah, and so he goes out and he's got a box in his trunk and he gives me a book and he signs it to me and gives it to me, and I said, thanks, man. He said, yeah, man. He said, it ain't nothing. It's just a little old book I wrote, And so a friend of mine had written a book that he'd worked on for years. And I'd been reading my friend's book, and so I got home. It was like a Saturday evening. I was kind of tired because I had a long week. And so, I went upstairs and sat in my bed and I looked at Billy's Joe and I cracked it open, thinking, read the foreword or whatever. And I read the whole fucking book. It was like 3 a.m. when I got done, It was like, I sat there and I was just like, this is the best book I've ever read. This is like unbelievable, I mean, it's so well written and it's so good, and I could read it again 5 times over. I'm like, man, what a book, Billy Joe. Most writers spend their whole life trying to write a book that good. And Billy Joe knocked it out because he felt like, well, maybe I ought to. Yeah, I want to write a book. Oh, yeah. Good story was one night the promoters throwing things at me from the side of the stage, trying to get my attention. And I look over at him and he says, 20 more minutes, 20 more minutes. Tell her 20 more minutes. So I told the lead singer 20 more minutes. And she looks at me like, we're done. I said, well, he wants 20 more minutes. So we gave him 20 more minutes. So we came off and we were like, what's going on? He said, well, Merle's not here. Band's here, but there's no Merle. And so the buses were downstairs in this parking garage. And so I had my little Fender amp and my guitar. And so the Strangers went out and started playing. I think it was Kenny. What was that guy's name? He was fronting the band at the time, singing harmony, and would open the show. And he's out there doing, Heartaches by the Number or Wind Me Up or whatever, It's just the stock country covers, the Merle Haggard show, So I go downstairs to load my amp into the bus with my guitar, and I'm down there. And I'm open up the bay and I hear this horn honking, and this guy gets out of a limousine. I said, hey. He says, well, can you help me out here? And so I close the bay and I walk up there and Merle Haggard and Bonnie Owens are in the back of the limousine drunk. And he says, can you help me get this guy up these steps to the stage? Can you show me where the stage is? I was like, yeah. So we carried Merle Haggard up these stairs, me and this guy, right? And I got him through to the side of the stage and he brushes us off, and he straightens up his hat and kind of shakes it off a little bit. And he walks out, and they're in the middle of a song, and he walks out on stage and takes his guitar, and he hits this big old E chord. The band stops, and he goes, wang, and he starts singing Folsom Prison Blues, right? And so I was like, oh, shit, I didn't remember if I'd locked the bus or not, So I ran back down the steps, he's in the middle of Folsom Prison Blues. I go back down the steps, make sure the bus is locked, and this lady's trying to stagger out of it's Bonnie Owens, and she says, young man, can you help me to the stage, please? So, yeah, yes, Miss Owens. So I carry Bonnie up the steps, this long flight of steps. And she stumbles up there and she's kind of giggling, and looking a little bit embarrassed, And so I pointed her to the stage and she walked out there and assumed her place at the microphone, and starts clapping along. And he's still singing Folsom Prison Blues. Right? And there was the tour was sponsored by George Dickel Whiskey. And they had these two guys that would walk around backstage. And one guy had a bottle of Jack Daniels and one guy had a bottle of George Dickel. And they would say, now, I'm going to pour you a glass of this Jack Daniels. Now, you drink that. Now, I want you drink the Jack. Okay, you drink that. Now, I want you to drink this George Dickel. You can't tell me that Jack Daniels is as good as this George Dickel. Right? And that was their routine, And I quickly figured out that maybe that's why everybody's a little bit drunk on this tour, And so it was a good tour, but anyway, that was the only time I ever saw Merle Haggard inebriated. That was the one and only time I ever saw him that way. He wasn't a big drinker. I don't know if, he wasn't a big, he smoked a lot of weed, but he wasn't a big drinker. He smoked pot from the time he woke up to the time he laid his head down. When I started playing with Marty, he and Merle were big friends, and we cut a song called Farmer's Blues in the studio down in Cool Springs down there. There's there used to be a studio down there called the Sound Kitchen. And it was funny because, Marty had it all, he'd written the song with his wife, Connie Smith, and he had it all figured out. And Merle Haggard is supposed to get there at like 6:30. Well, about 6:30, Merle Haggard calls and said, "Hey, can you call the Cracker Barrel and have them cater we're hungry. We're going to be a little bit late, but we'll be there." So it was crazy because, the Cracker Barrel delivers this giant spread of food, enough for like 20 people. And I swear, like right at the time that food got set out, all these people started coming in that I kind of knew, from different areas of the country scene around Nashville, but they were all Merle Haggard people. And they were not in his bus. They were just arriving, And it was like a whole backstage thing going on in the lounge at the Sound Kitchen. There's like 20 people in there, And then his bus pulls up, and then there's another, 6 people that get off just to make Merle Haggard be able to come in and sing. And he, he's a shy guy, kind of self-conscious, uncomfortable in a crowd kind of person. He's not the most social, he's not the kind of guy he's very shy. So he came in and checked everybody out, and we went over the song, and he suggested a few lyric changes. My favorite one is the line is, "The tractor's broke, the fence is down," and Haggard says, "I think, can we change that to the tractor is old, the fence is down?" And Marty was like, "Yeah, that'll work." I mean, that's Haggard's a wonderful poet, so he and then I was in the booth right next to him, and I could see him through the window, and I'd never been in the studio with Haggard before, and he stood at the microphone and he gyrated around when he sang, like he would like gyrate it was almost like looking at James Brown or something, singing, and he really threw himself into the performance of the song. And we, what you hear on the record is that just that first take, of him singing the shit out of it, it's a little ballad, but and I'm there playing the guitar, looking at him with my headphones on, and he's in my head and the headphones, I'm watching him, and, I'm like, wow, look at that, man. It's Merle Haggard singing. He's very shy and nice and kind of quiet and standoffish, and it took him a long time to where he got to be friends with me, and years later he would talk to me, we'd talk about guitar players and guitar and stuff, music, whatever. He's a music hound, crazy. Last time we were at his house, we took Chris Scruggs with him, and we ended up talking about Bob Dunn, who was the the steel guitar player for Milton Brown. And he was a big Bob Dunn fan. Nobody ever played like Bob Dunn. He was like a Dixieland player. And Chris Scruggs went off and with Merle Haggard on this Bob Dunn thing. Why Bob Dunn sounded different from anybody else? Because he listened to, he was a Texan who had heard a lot of Dixieland, and he sounds like a trombone player when he plays the steel, And I was like, you're right. They're right. They're big Bob Dunn fans, those two. I was like, wow,
Is this the picture I saw of Chris with the Lefty Frizzell's guitar?
Yeah. The Lefty Frizzell guitar was the first guitar that Merle Haggard ever played on stage. When he was 16 or 17, his friend, who was a little bit older than him, they went down to this beer garden place near Bakersfield, and I can't play the name of it's a beer garden, and they had shows there. And you can look it up, I think. But anyway, they went down to see Lefty. During the course of the evening, this guy goes and gets Merle, and he drags him backstage, which was probably just where the beer was, back behind the stage, this place, a honky-tonk, glorified honky-tonk, maybe a dance kind of thing, He says, "Hey, Merle, this guy can sing just like you." And so Lefty handed him that guitar, the Lefty Frizzell. It's a Bigsby neck on a J200 Gibson body. Paul Bigsby put the neck on there and wrote Lefty Frizzell in pearl inlays into the fingerboard, That's a famous guitar. But anyway, he hands him that guitar, and so he said, "Sing for me." So Merle sang a couple of songs, and I said, "What did you sing, man?" And he said, "I'm not really sure." He said, I can't remember what two he mentioned that probably he sang, but they weren't Lefty songs. So he said, "Get up there on the stage with my band and go sing a couple of songs." And so Merle, he's holding Lefty's guitar, and Lefty just pushes him up on the stage, and he sang a couple of songs. That was the first time he was ever on stage.
First time he sang into a microphone, even.
Yeah. Yeah. And so he's playing with Lefty Frizzell's band, playing Lefty Frizzell's guitar. And so anyway, that long story, that guitar ended up at Retrofret in Brooklyn for sale. And they contacted Marty, and Marty said, "Look, I'm not interested in that guitar because that guitar should be owned by Merle Haggard." And so he arranged for those guys to fly the guitar to Palisadro, where Merle lived out by Reading there. And they took the guitar to Merle's house and made a deal. They they actually lowered the price so he could, have it. And that's where it lives to this day. And that's why Scruggs is playing it in the picture there. We've all played that guitar. I've got a picture of me playing the guitar on my phone here.
How's it playing? How's it sound?
Oh man, it's amazing. It's a 1950 J200 Gibson body, which is the biggest acoustic that Gibson made, and the top of the line. And Paul Bigsby, the great steel guitar builder and electric guitar builder in California, who is really the guy basically responsible for people having pedals on their steel guitar, and the Bigsby vibrato unit, and the Fender headstock, 6 on a side headstock, that all comes from Paul Bigsby, whose shop was right by the Fender shop. And anyway, Paul Bigsby put that neck on there, which is a Bigsby neck, which is generally they play better than any other necks. They're better made, and he mounted it onto that guitar, and that was Lefty's guitar. Actually, the name is on the pick guard. Now that I think about it, yeah, it's inlaid on the pick guard, and it has the J200 fingerboard, but with a different neck on it. It's really a fast neck. It's like playing an electric guitar, but it sounds like $1 million, man. We would go out there, and anytime we were touring around California, Marty always would detour and go visit Merle, and we would record with him up at his studio in back of his house. Sometimes, one time the four of us backed him up, cutting a couple of Bob Dylan tunes, and it was always fun to hang out in his living room. And he'd talk about music with us. We were like his audience, he felt comfortable around us, and he could talk about stuff that maybe he knew that we were just as crazy about the stuff as he is, you know.
What would those subjects be?
Jimmy Rogers, Lefty Frizzell, Hank Williams, you know, Bob Wills, whatever.
Would he sit around and, you know, how we all noodle on guitar?
Oh, yeah.
Sitting around?
Love to jam. Yeah, we'd sit around and pick with him. Yeah, love to do that. He'd tell stories. We'd ask him questions. He has a good memory for sessions and stuff like that, like who played what on what song and that kind of thing. You know, there's really nothing much to tell, really. I mean, he was a great singer and a great songwriter that had a great band, and it's amazing how long they stayed on the road, you know, from 1965 or 66 till right before he died. Norman was still playing steel. He came on board in 68 when Fuzzy decided he couldn't play steel and manage anymore. And Fuzzy was still there to the, you know, he showed up last time we played in California in Bakersfield. He came to the show, you know. Norman was there at our show. It's amazing that how long, I mean, Merle Haggard wore out a lot of musicians. A lot of them, you know, died, you know, during their tenure as strangers. A lot of them just couldn't handle it anymore. They just had to leave, you know. But Norman hung in there from 68 till, it was only last year, right? Haggard died 16, right? So that's a pretty good run.
Do you remember the last time you saw him?
Yeah, I was up at his house in, right, several months before he passed away. We were at his house.
Was he in bad shape at that point?
Yeah, he wasn't feeling good. He put on a good performance for us that day. He was glad we were there, and he, you know, but I could see it was an effort for him to breathe, even though he was still smoking weed.
That might have made him feel better.
Oh, I'm sure it did. You know, he knew what was going on with himself more than anybody let on, and I think he chose to go out the way he did. You know, I think he could have maybe had some, you know, incredibly invasive operation and maybe prolonged his life, but I think he just I don't think he wanted to go through that. That's my guess. You know, from reading between the lines, you know, that's what I assume.
When you left that day, did you realize that might be the last time you see him?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, we were pretty much convinced of it, I would say, without saying so, you know.
Nobody said it to each other
Uh-uh.
after you left.
No, but, you know, we knew.